All right. Greetings, Community Action. So today's webinar is about how we can move beyond the org standards more in the direction of excellence. This is the last in a series of such webinar resources that we're providing. My name is Aaron Wicks. I'm with the National Community Action Partnership, and Courtney Kohler is also with us to help keep an eye on the chat and questions. And so if you do have questions or comments as we proceed, please go ahead and preferably use the chat function so that folks can see those, and we'll try to take account of them as we go. I want to start off by sharing this quote from Stephen Covey. Stephen Covey is one of the most respected thinkers in the area of cultivating strong and healthy personal and professional relationships. He's really got a unique perspective and expertise in that area, and we think that this quote really captures not only the essence of the Covey principle, but also what it is that we're trying to do within our own organizations and within our network. And Covey says, the only thing that endures over time is the law of the farm. I must prepare the ground, put in the seed, cultivate it, weed it, water it, and then gradually nurture growth and development to full maturity. And I think that's just a perfect analogy when we think about how we strengthen our organizations and our colleagues and ourselves. It's not something that just happens. It requires a lot of intentionality and effort, and it's ongoing cultivation. And I really like that word, cultivation. So that's kind of the concept that we'll use today. So our agenda, just so you have a sense of where we're going to go in this webinar, we're going to first start off by saying a little bit more about what we mean when we talk about going from meeting to exceeding, the idea that there's a continuum that we have in mind. We'll talk a little bit about the org standards that address staff training and development, because there are a couple of org standards that are out there. So we definitely want to be sure we are in alignment with those. But the purpose of this discussion is to go beyond them, to recognize that those are a really great starting point. That's where we should all be in our own ways. But how do we think about going beyond those towards a higher level of excellence? And so we'll talk about what that path looks like. And then we'll share just a few resources and ideas in terms of what that path might look like. So one of those is using our Roma framework. When in doubt, go to Roma. That can help you refocus on what it is you're looking to do and how to do that. So we'll use our Roma tools. And we also want to be sure that we're connecting these types of activities to our organization's strategic plans. Because the crux of really any strategic plan is making sure you have the resources to execute it. And one of the most important resources you have is your staff and your volunteers. And then we'll finish by just sharing a little bit about some of the specific resources and the certifications that exist within the Community Action Network. Starting with the organizational standards, and of course we all have these in common because these are the organizational standards for our entire network. Hopefully you're all pretty familiar with these, but maybe don't keep each of the standards memorized item by item. I'll admit that I don't. The area that we want to focus on today comes within the broad domain of operations and accountability. And so within that is human resource management, financial operations and oversight, data and analysis. And so we're really talking about human resource management. Although I do just want to remind everyone that that we should never think of these org standards or the areas of excellence that we'll be talking about in isolation, because they all connect with one another. So even though this particular discussion, it kind of resides in this human resource management box, we definitely want to encourage you to not think of these as boxes, but rather interconnected and overlapping areas of your organization, because they should all feed into one another in different ways. And so I mentioned the org standards and excellence. So we have an additional framework, and this is the standards of excellence in community action. If any of you are at agencies that have earned the distinction of winning the Award of Excellence in community action, that distinction means that your agency has achieved very clear standards of excellence in these 7 areas that we've identified here: leadership, strategic planning, customer focus, results, organizational focus, human resource focus. So again, similar to the org standards, these are broad areas of focus as you think about how your organization progresses towards excellence, but they shouldn't be thought of, as separate, discrete areas. They're all united and interconnected. But again, our discussion is specifically focused within the area of human resource focus. So let's get into the community action standards of excellence and the ones that specifically relate to staff development and human resource management. There are 35, I'm sorry, let me pause here for a second. There are 35 standards of excellence in the community action standards of excellence framework. These 35 practices align very closely with the Baldrige quality standards. And so while these standards apply specifically to community action, they also are representative of broader quality standards that other organizations also strive for. So when we talk about the community action standards of excellence, I want to be really clear. These aren't just things that our network has identified and said, it'd be really great if we could all, have organizations that do these things. These are really the best of the best across all types of organizations, and we've just reframed them in a community action lens. So the standards of excellence are really a valuable resource in terms of setting our focus high. And so we like to think of a continuum. We should all be meeting the org standards because they are really the core of what we do and how we do it. And so we all strive to be in alignment with those organizational standards. But we also recognize that there are ways that we can go beyond them. And so we encourage everyone to think of this as a continuum. It's not, we're meeting the org standards, and now let's make this giant leap to the standards of excellence. It's a path, it's a journey, it's a process. And the other word that we've highlighted here is that it requires a commitment, right? Because it's not just a matter of identifying some standards and saying, let's check the box. Okay, that's more of a compliance mindset. And in community action, our mindset is less compliance and more around excellence. We don't do things to check boxes. We do things so that we can have impact in our community and so our customers can succeed. So we focus on excellence, and that requires an ongoing commitment. So it's really important as you begin this journey to make sure that all of your stakeholders are on the same page. So let's get into the substance of what this specific journey would look like in terms of building staff capacity. As we said at the beginning, there are two organizational standards that are relevant. They're 7.8 and 7.9. So we'll just cover those briefly so we can all be on the same page as to what those are. Standard 7.8 says that all staff participate in a new employee orientation within 60 days of hire. That's for the nonprofit community action agencies. And for our public CAPs, because they are often a unit of government and part of a broader organization, the standard is slightly different and says that local government policies for new employee orientation are followed. So pretty broad standard. There just has to be some new employee orientation within 60 days of hire. So let's go beneath the surface a little bit. The purpose of this standard is to make sure that there's some sort of onboarding process as new employees are brought on board. It's also a way to make sure that employees start their employment with us very clearly connected to our mission and vision. It's obviously an important part of ensuring employee productivity. So they start off on the right foot with a clear idea of what their role is in the organization, as well as the organization's broader role in the community and in the community action network as a whole. Note that this organizational standard does not have any curriculum requirements. It only says that there needs to be some new employee orientation, and it doesn't define what that requires. So it's really up to you to determine what those elements are. And obviously, some elements of a new employee orientation are pretty straightforward. Some of them are meet legal requirements in terms of having new employees sign certain documents and things like that. But there are a lot of other possibilities, and we'll talk about some of those in terms of what is included in this orientation. We also want to note that there is no specificity about how it is done. So it could be in a one-on-one sort of setting, like with a supervisor, or it could be done in a group setting. And a lot of organizations do find a group setting to be more efficient, if only because you can orient more new staff at one time. And the date of hire is what we consider to be the first day of work for the employee. So when you're thinking about that 60-day requirement in the standard, use the date of hire as the first day. So as I said, there are no required topics for a new employee orientation. But think about all the possible things that could be covered. And the topics may vary depending on the employee. Obviously, if an organization is onboarding a new CEO, they're going to get a very thorough and deep onboarding into the organization. But that doesn't mean that other staff should get a lot less. Obviously, they don't all need the same type of onboarding that a CEO would need. But think about the opportunities that exist as you onboard staff. And so some of those opportunities would include connecting new staff to the mission and history of community action. Because that can be a really good way to motivate a new employee who maybe doesn't know much about the organization or the history of our movement. Time and effort reporting is often a common element, very critical, particularly for employees that are being funded through government contracts where there are a lot of requirements around time and effort. Roma, probably don't want to do a full Roma training as part of your new employee orientation, but definitely a great opportunity to introduce new employees to the concept of Roma and its importance and role in your organization. Data collection and reporting processes. This is particularly important for frontline staff who may be playing a role in data collection, either because they are collecting data and sharing it with someone else in the organization, or they might be generating some of the outcomes or outputs that are included in the data. And so it's good for them to know, how does my work connect to these reports that we provide to our board and to the community and things like that. Job description, performance expectations, other types of education and training opportunities, agency tools and resources, and of course, it's not a requirement, but you should probably think of it as one. Definitely want to make sure they have some exposure to personnel policies or an employee handbook if your organization has one. So again, none of these are required by the org standards, but these are some of the common elements of a new employee orientation. In terms of documentation, we'll be a little bit general here because different states apply the organizational standards in different ways. And so I don't want to run afoul of how those differences exist and give you some improper guidance. But in general, the understanding that we have as a network is that this standard can be documented through such things as staff receiving a copy of the personnel policies or the employee handbook, because that's usually a part of the orientation process. It can be documented through some sort of orientation packet or other materials that are shared with new staff. And it could also be documented by things that might exist in your personnel files in your HR department, like a sign-in sheet. I met with my supervisor and they oriented me to my employment here at this organization, or an acknowledgement form. I have received the personnel policies, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all the types of documentation that are generally considered to be sufficient to show that this new employee orientation has occurred. Now, of course, we don't want the orientation to be the last kind of touch that we have with staff. We want this just to be an orientation. It's just the beginning. So as we think about going from meeting the org standards to pursuing excellence, this is a great opportunity to say, now what? We've had our orientation. Our new staff member has been onboarded. Now what? And the now what is really sort of what 7.9 addresses, and that is ongoing staff training and development. And those two should integrate really nicely. Ideally, the orientation provides a very good understanding to new staff about what they can expect in terms of training and professional development. Likewise, as staff gain more training and knowledge, that can influence the orientation because it's always great for staff who have been through the orientation and have a little more experience at the organization to look back and say, if I had known then. So you should always refresh your orientation based on the learnings that have come through succeeding staff development activities. So let's go to that standard and talk about a little bit about that, and then we'll move towards how these sort of baseline expectations around staff orientation and staff development can be taken further. So standard 7.9 is actually the same for nonprofit community action agencies as well as public community action agencies. And that standard says that the organization conducts or makes available staff development or training on an ongoing basis. So again, as we did for 7.8, let's go beneath the surface of this a little bit. 7.9, the purpose of 7.9 is to make sure that that our network is aligned to be able to deliver results and hold ourselves accountable for them. And so ROMA, or some system comparable to ROMA, is the system that we use for that. So obviously, that's one part of our staff development, is understanding the significance of ROMA and the role that staff play in accountability. But staff training and development is also important for reasons beyond that. We want to live our mission. We care about the potential and the opportunities of our customers and our community. Well, then we certainly have the same concern for our colleagues, because we're all part of the community too, and so we want to we want to live that ideal within our organization and cultivate our own potential, as well as support the community in that way. We also want to develop a talent network throughout the Community Action Network. Those of us that have been in community action for a few years can probably list several colleagues that we've met that have either mentored us or encouraged us or supported us or have taught us something new. So strengthening our network across the board is critical, and each of us can help do that by developing our own staff within our own organizations. We also want to be able to demonstrate the effective use of the funds that we have to engage in staff development. And again, like in 7.8, with respect to the new employee orientation, there are no specific requirements or delivery methods around this standard. So what could it include? First of all, it could be staff training or development that you deliver directly, or it could be done by a third party, or both. It can be done in-house. It can be done in a community setting, perhaps in partnership with other organizations. It can involve conference participation. It can involve online resources, and we'll talk about a variety of those that are available. And often, again, there aren't requirements, but often it is guided by the development of goals by staff in partnership with supervision, and often involves some role of coaching. Again, that could be coaching within the organization, or it could be coaching across the network. And not a requirement, but a practice that's out there. And so that's just yet another method that can be used to align with this organizational standard. A little bit about what would suffice in terms of documentation. Having training or professional development plans. A lot of organizations have a process for annual performance reviews or performance appraisals. Often, part of that is something that focuses on professional development. So making sure that that process is pursued and that those plans are completed is an excellent way to demonstrate that you have met the intent of this organizational standard. Another way to do that is to document the various trainings that are provided to staff. And so that can be done through documenting presentations or materials that were shared, evaluations of those trainings by staff, or attendee lists, like a sign-in sheet. Similarly, documentation at off-site trainings or online trainings sometimes can be documented through a certificate of participation or just through capturing the materials that were presented and noting the staff that participated in that training. And ideally, this information is captured in some way in your HR or personnel files. And it can be a challenge to capture all of that information. So this is another example of how the organizational standards provide great flexibility in terms of how you do that. So if you're in an organization where you're tempted to say, well, that HR should do that, that's up to you. There's nothing in the requirements that says the HR department has to be the holder of this information. And I think the best practice evidence that we have from the network is that it's best when it's a shared responsibility with clear roles in terms of who collects documentation and then how it's maintained at the agency. So let's shift from the organizational standards to what it would look like to go beyond those. And we've got 3 best practices that we're going to share. But before we get to those, I want to emphasize why we feel that it's so important to talk about going beyond the organizational standards. Because we're so busy, and particularly in the environment that we're working in now, not just the environment of COVID, but political change, social change, a lot of anxiety. Sometimes it can feel a bit overwhelming to try to go beyond what we kind of minimally have to do. So, why can't we just say, I meet the org standards, isn't that good enough? And yeah, in a certain respect, it is. And we all have to make decisions organizationally about what our capacity is. But I want to emphasize that there's an opportunity before us when we look at staff development in particular, because the organizational standards are very flexible. So even if your approach is we aspire to be in alignment with the org standards, and hopefully someday we can have a journey that takes us beyond them. But at the moment, we don't feel that we're there yet. Even if that's where you are, there's still opportunity, because the org standards themselves give us such wide discretion. And so if that's kind of where you are and you're thinking, we can only take on so much as an agency at one time, think about how you can be creative just within the framework of the org standards. Because what you do there is often the first step, and it could be a significant step in that road towards excellence. And as you can see in the image, that road could go in any number of directions, depending on where you are and where your agency needs to go. And so what are those best practices that we identify in terms of effective human resources management? Well, one of them, and we talked about this at the outset, one is to think of performance management as a process rather than an event. New employee orientation is an event. A staff training is an event. Connect those events. Turn those events into a narrative for your staff. Make sure they're well connected to other elements of your agency's capacity building. So always think of them as parts of a process, and it's a process that is ongoing. That frame is really critical. Second, make sure that to the extent possible, you customize training opportunities to areas that are of most significance to individuals and their role in the organization. Because sometimes there's a temptation to say, I went to this conference and they had this great training on trauma-informed practices, and I want my whole agency, I want all the staff to get that training. And that probably is a good idea. But is it something that everyone needs now? Maybe it's something that everyone should get at some point. But as you look at agency capacity, there might be some staff that should really focus on that first, maybe cultivate it within the agency, implement it, make it come to life, and then bring other staff along so that they can also see their role in that. And so you want to be very strategic about which opportunities are offered to which staff. And if you can connect it directly to their performance evaluation or performance appraisal, then that helps them have a clearer idea of how those development opportunities are directly connected to the work that they do and the expectations that exist of them. The third best practice is thinking of staff development not in terms of managing and discipline, but in terms of coaching and mentoring. So, instead of sort of the carrot and the stick, I have staff and this is what they're supposed to do, and I'm going to track them and, count how productive they've been, how many widgets they've produced. And if they aren't productive enough, I'm going to, exercise some discipline or provide some incentive and see if we can increase their productivity. Obviously that's an extreme example. None of us, hopefully, work in an environment quite like that. So I use that as an extreme to say that what we want to do is look more in the direction of coaching and mentoring, recognizing that we all work better and we're all open to development when we have relationships where there's trust and where there's a sharing of knowledge between colleagues that share mutual respect or shared experience. And so that's where having a coaching model or helping staff connect to a mentoring relationship. It may not be with their supervisor. It may be, often it's better if it's with someone who does not have supervisory authority. Those can be very important relationships to cultivate and much more effective in terms of helping build our staff resources. So we talked about this process. Here's a graphic that kind of puts it all together, all the different elements that could be part of that, because our agencies are always changing. We're bringing new people in. People are growing. They're learning. They're taking on new responsibilities. They're shifting responsibilities to others. And at some point, people leave. And when they leave, they often leave with a lot of knowledge in their head. And so we want to be sure that that knowledge doesn't leave with them. And so these are some of the tools that we can include in that process of making sure that all those transitions that occur happen smoothly, and we don't lose the great richness of knowledge that our staff have. And so that includes things like having job descriptions, having clear standards of performance, having an onboarding process, regular education and training, coaching and feedback. These are things we've already talked about, performance reviews, including rewards and recognition, because staff morale is such a critical element of managing this process. And then, of course, career development, because so many staff are motivated by knowing that there's a path forward for them in terms of their career. So the idea when we talk about a process is that all of these different elements are seen and are experienced as a process and not as sort of distinct things. And again, it's a journey to get there. And that's why we think of this as a standard of excellence. Okay, this is the gold standard. And specifically, if you're looking at the standards of excellence, this is standard 5.4. And this is what we aspire to. An agency has formally adopted and systematically, can't underline that enough times. I figured once was sufficient, but systematically deploys an agency-wide staff skill and professional development policy or plan. It includes provisions for assessing employee needs for future training and evaluating the sufficiency of and improving offered training. New and current staff orientations cover agency mission and vision and history, as well as the mission, vision, values, history, promise of community action, and ROMA. The agency offers full support to appropriate staff to acquire and maintain Certified Community Action Professional, or CCAP, certification. So if that is not an accurate descriptor of your organization, don't feel bad. This is the standard of excellence, and it's meant to be the gold standard. and some of our agencies have achieved this, so it is doable. But you can see it requires a lot of work, and it's quite a journey to really live out this standard. And so that's kind of what we want to talk about for the remainder of this workshop. How do we do this? How do we get to that type of standard? Because in a lot of ways, it can feel almost unattainable to have all those pieces working together. Who has the time? Who has the resources? We've got so many fires to put out. That seems like it's beyond what we can do. So let's talk about what we can do. And so some of the things that we're going to cover in the remainder of this are some of the proactive training, assessment, and planning tools, such as ROMA and CQI. We're also going to talk a little bit about making sure that things are connected to the strategic plan and how you can do that. And a key part of that is making sure that your strategic plan in some way addresses building your agency and staff capacity to do the work. Because as I said earlier, nothing in the strategic plan is going to be fully realized if the staff that are going to implement and achieve those plan goals don't have the resources that they need. And often those resources include knowledge, skills, and expertise. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll also come back to this idea of having a systematic approach, having a comprehensive system that ties all of these elements together. And one really great way to do that is to focus on developing career pathways for staff. That's one piece of the puzzle, but it's a really productive path to pursue because it can lead to a lot of other pieces of the puzzle falling into place. So in terms of training, assessment, and planning, let's think about our ROMA cycle. And these are the elements of our ROMA cycle, so hopefully these are familiar to everyone. It includes assessment, planning, implementation, results, and evaluation. So just apply those lenses to the needs of your staff. When you do assessment, how do you assess the needs of your staff? So there are requirements. Head Start classrooms require certifications and trainings. Fiscal staff have certain certifications. Staff in various positions, there are required levels of expertise that they need to have. So obviously that's one part of your assessment. But then you also want to look at your strategic plan and other goals that your organization has, because those are going to inform where you need to provide additional support for staff development. Then you need to engage in planning. And again, the planning process is really going to depend on how ready you are and what kind of journey you're ready to take. So your planning process could be a broad one that looks to develop this whole system, or it may be a more short-term planning process to sort of say, how do we achieve step number one? Let's just do this a step at a time. So remember that your ROMA cycle is ongoing, and you don't have to develop the whole big plan on your first trip around the cycle. Then you implement your staff training plan. You do it with intentionality, and you make sure that it's done in a way that engages staff to ensure that the implementation is smooth and successful. And then, of course, you track the results, you measure the results as you implement, and as you collect the data, you review it, you make adjustments as you go, and at some point you do something deeper, and you do an evaluation. Now, it doesn't have to be a formal project evaluation, but you do a more comprehensive evaluation of what's working and what's not. And then that feeds into your next trip around the Roma cycle in terms of assessing staff needs. Where are we? How did we do in our plan? And what are the new needs that have come up? What are the existing needs that weren't fully addressed? And you go through the cycle again. Now, connecting this to the strategic plan, as I said, is critical. Strategic plan is a plan for your entire organization. Your board has played a critical role in pointing the way. Often they've played a critical role in developing parts of the strategic plan. And so staff training should be part of that. And so again, think of staff training as the capacity that you currently have and the capacity that you need to carry out the plan effectively. Because a strategic plan requires time, it requires money, but it really, above all, requires the right staff in the right places doing the right things to make the plan happen. And so as you think about each of those parts, those are all staff capacity issues. Do we have the right staff in place? Have we provided them with the training, et cetera, et cetera? And then as you're having that internal dialogue in the context of your strategic plan, that's where you identify, well, then what are the gaps that we have in terms of knowledge, skills, or abilities that might prevent us from getting to where we need to go? Let's say one of our strategic plan goals is to really strengthen our fundraising ability. Do we have staff that have, the expertise to do that? Do staff that don't have fundraising as their primary goal, do they know what their role is? And do we need to provide them with some training in terms of how the work they do is so critical to doing the development that we need to do to reach our strategic plan goals? So it's really looking at all the elements of your strategic plan and then making sure that you've got all the staff components in place to make that happen. And as you do that, just to go a little deeper, we want to encourage you to think about it in a couple of dimensions. When you look at staff potential, you want to look at both the what and the how. So what is the dimension of performance results? Are they achieving, the what that they need to do? And often that's what we measure through performance appraisals. But we also want to look at the dynamic dimension, which is the how, because the what doesn't happen magically. It happens through interaction. It happens because staff have gelled as a team, because you have effective leaders. And you have effective, I'll use the word followers, but I don't like to think of followers. I like to think of everyone as a leader, but leaders with different roles. So leadership behaviors are critical in terms of how the work is being done. And so as you're doing these assessments of your staff capacity, you want to think about both of those dimensions. And there are some different resources out there to help assess along those two dimensions. And then I said that another element of all this is the development of a comprehensive system. And so as you think about that system, and of course developing a comprehensive system is an enormous project in of itself, so we're not going to be able to go through all the parts of it, but we do want to emphasize some of the key inputs as you approach your journey to that comprehensive system. And some of these may be very well developed. Some of them you may look at and say, wow, that's one we need to put a little more time into if we're going to make that really click in terms of making this a system that functions well to build our staff capacity. So you want to look at what you're currently doing in terms of training needs assessments. You're going to want to, and that's broad. That's how are you measuring the needs for staff training that you have across your organization. Also, what are the resources that you have on an individual level to assess individual staff needs and develop plans for them? What is your performance evaluation process like? How well is it functioning? And how well is it integrated to other things? How are you using staff feedback mechanisms? Because, as I said a moment ago, every staff is a leader in your organization. And so everyone has leadership to exercise. There are a variety of ways to create those opportunities. Staff feedback is the concept that helps identify what those are. And often staff in organizations that aren't really doing this at the highest level, often the staff, the number one thing they say is that they don't feel that that they are afforded these opportunities, or that they provide them but no one listens. So staff feedback is often something that requires a lot of attention in terms of making sure that that's an effective part of your staff development system. And then, of course, the strategic plan, which we've already spoken to. Since I've talked about leadership, let me just say a little bit more about leadership development. Because if you do take the approach that every staff member is a leader of your organization, then you need to think about it in a couple of ways, we think. One is making sure that there's an educational system that supports managers to develop their skills. Now, yes, that would support staff at all levels, but I just want to highlight the reason it's particularly important for those in management positions is that they're the ones responsible for ensuring that non-management staff are being supported and cultivated in the work that they do. So while it's important that everyone gets quality training and has a good grasp of leadership practices, it's most important for the managers who are going to be modeling that. So you want to be sure that you've got the right system in place to equip them to do that. And then you also want to be sure that there's a proactive approach to cultivating talent, because sometimes talent just arrives on our doorstep, but more often than not, we have to seek it out. So be strategic in thinking about what are all those opportunities for going out and bringing either new talent into our organization or strengthening our talent by bringing in some new resources. And so, of course, there's a cycle here in terms of cultivating leadership. It's very similar to the Roma cycle. So you can see it has a lot of the same concepts: assessing, how we're doing, what people need, where we want to go in the future, developing the program to help us cultivate the leadership to do that, identifying the right people to lead those efforts, and then making sure that we're successful in helping them to do that. And we have a resource that we'll come back to in a moment at the Community Action Partnership called Batter Up, Building Your Leadership Bench. And so that's available on the partnership website. So part of that process is assessing the current work that you're doing and the needs of your staff. It's critical because, as I said before, none of us stay in our positions forever. Some of us maybe stay many years, but some just pass through. So we want to have an eye on who's coming in, who's leaving, and taking valuable knowledge with them. We also want to look at the benefits of cultivating leadership, all that potential that may be untapped within our staff. We want to think about the message that we're sending in terms of valuing our staff, and making sure that they see that we're living the value that we seek to lift up in the community. Because there's nothing more discouraging to staff morale than to have this really inspiring mission and work that we do in community action, but then to look at your own organization and say, yeah, I wish we did that, because we don't. And I hope that's pretty rare, but it's always important to make sure that the message that you're conveying internally is in alignment with the one that you're conveying externally. Of course, we want to look at the impact that we're having to make sure that that the work that we're doing is translating into outcomes in the community, and that we've got staff that are ready to go to that next level. And then, of course, we need to be aware of the costs, because everything comes with costs. So we need to think about time. We need to think about money. We need to think about opportunity cost. Investing in staff means pulling them away from certain things. And so what opportunities might we be giving up in order to invest in staff leadership? We also want to be sure that we're looking at the future. Again, this is part of that leadership cycle that we had. So where do we want to be in 5 years, in 10 years? What are the skills and talents that we need to get there? Do we have them now? Can we develop them? Do we need to bring them in with new people? What skills and talents do we need when we get there? There's a management book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's a brilliant insight. The same skills that got you to where you are right now are not the skills that will help you sustain a future state that is better. So you need to think about not just getting to that future state, but what it's going to take to stay there. Otherwise, you may be vulnerable to going backwards. So those are the visionary thoughts that you need to have going forward. Then organizationally, you want to look at your organization and think about connections among people. You want to look at the culture that you have in place, because that has a direct impact on the motivation of staff to engage in professional development. Are they just attending to check a box? Or is there genuine engagement in these efforts by staff at all levels? And then you want to look at your organization's approach to organizational learning. Do you have ways of institutionalizing the knowledge that you acquire and then share with staff? And these are no easy things to do. Again, that's why we think of this as a journey. Here's an example when we think about the individual level of this journey and developing an individual development plan. Here's an example. And again, this slide deck will be shared, so don't feel like you need to take a picture of this or try to sketch it out right now. You can see it has a very similar type of layout to our logic model. And that's not an accident. It has kind of a mission statement. What's the long-term career goal? And then it has the key elements of getting there, the objectives, the skills, and the steps needed, et cetera. So you don't have to make this more complicated than it is. We know Roma, we know the logic model, we know how to plan for success. We can apply that to community change, to programs, as well as ourselves as individuals as we develop our own goals and share them with our colleagues. I just want to remind you of some of the opportunities that we have specifically in community action. None of these are really requirements, but we do think of these as opportunities to really celebrate accomplishments that we and our colleagues achieve within the field of community action. And so we want to remind you that these are opportunities that you can make available to your staff as appropriate. So that includes becoming a nationally certified Roma trainer or implementer. Both options are extremely valuable, and it's really up to you in terms of which path may be more appropriate for different staff. But in terms of substance, it's an incredibly valuable credential to have within your staff. There's the Certified Community Action Professional, the CCAP, which is our credential to sort of identify that someone has achieved a level of knowledge and experience in the field of community action across many areas that demonstrates that they're sort of an established leader and practitioner in the field. We've got tons of information about the CCAP program on our Community Action Partnership website as well. And then there's also the Pathways to Excellence peer reviewer or implementer curriculum that we have. And the Pathways to Excellence is particularly relevant to this discussion because Pathways is specifically designed to help walk you through the process of going from meeting to exceeding expectations. And so if that's a journey that you're on and you'd like to do it with others and you'd like maybe a small group of your staff to really invest in this, we'd encourage you to explore Pathways. And to put these all together, we kind of think of these as the trifecta of community action leadership. All three of these, the Roma credential, the Pathways peer reviewer or implementer, and the CCAP, when you put those together, it's an amazing portfolio to identify someone as a leader in community action. Certainly, it's not the only way to demonstrate leadership, but for staff that are looking to take that next step in terms of developing their leadership capacity, these are three very clear credentials and programs that can help get them there. And if you're wondering about how they differ, there's more information available separate from this presentation. But very quickly, the Roma credential is definitely more focused on outcomes and data and planning. So if you have staff that are particularly relevant to those areas, program directors, managers, that credential is particularly applicable. The CCAP credential has more of a focus on community actions history, the practice of community action through your experience as a practitioner, as well as very deep and varied knowledge of leadership and management. And so that's a great credential, certainly for leadership staff, formal leadership staff, but it's a great aspirational goal for all staff. Maybe not all staff become CCAPs, but they can all maybe see themselves as a potential CCAP down the road because they will have exercised that leadership throughout their career. And then again, as I said a moment ago, the Pathways peer reviewer or implementer is really great for what we've been talking about today in terms of focusing on your organization, its performance, and making things systematic. I want to wrap up because I see that we're coming to the end of our time. So let me just share with you very quickly some opportunities for further exploration. One is the events that happen annually throughout our network. The Community Action Partnership has two big events each year, our Management Leadership Training Conference upcoming in February of 2021, and our annual convention in August. There's also the NCAF conference, National Community Action Foundation, which usually happens in March. There's the CAP Law Conference, which usually occurs in June. And NASCASP has their conferences usually in March and September of each year. And each of those provide a number of different opportunities for a variety of staff. So if you haven't fully engaged those, we'd encourage you to explore them. And then we also want to encourage you to think beyond just our national partner resources and think about organizations like the National Head Start Association. Certainly applicable for Head Start staff, but also useful, some of those workshops useful for other staff that may not have the knowledge that they need to be able to partner effectively within your organization with the Head Start program. I mentioned we have a number of tools at the partnership, the Batter Up resource is one of them. You can see it's available at our website and also at the TNTA Resource Center. That Resource Center is going to be going through some revisions, so you can check that out, but you'll probably want to focus on some of the more up-to-date and current resources on our website. If you want to look more at the organizational standards, which we talked about earlier, we do have a page devoted to those in those resources. We also have a variety of TNTA guides and toolkits and other recorded webinars. Some of them are specific to each of the organizational standards. Some of them go beyond them into the standards of excellence. And we have a number of assessment scales and tools that are also helpful as you try to measure and benchmark, where are we in this journey, and how can we take that next step. And then just to remind everyone, if you missed the earlier webinars in this series, we did some other ones that followed this approach of going from meeting to exceeding standards. And these recordings are all available on the partnership website. We did one previously on risk management, on effective board governance and organizational governance. We did another on the board's role in setting the mission, and also one relating to the strategic plan and organizational scorecards. The Standards of Excellence also has a web page at the partnership where you can learn more about those individual standards. So we'd encourage you to explore those and learn more about them. And finally, this webinar is being brought to you as part of our Human Capacity and Community Transformation Center of Excellence. That's a role that the partnership is playing to help build capacity within our network. So we'd encourage you to check out some of the resources that are specific to our role as the Center of Excellence in this effort. And this workshop recording will be available on that page. And if you do have any questions or want to follow up, we'd encourage you to reach out to us at any time. You can contact either Courtney or myself directly at the Community Action Partnership. We've provided our emails here, our phone numbers, and this information as well is available on the partnership website. So definitely reach out to us if you have any questions or comments about how we can help support you in this journey forward. And the last thing I just want to say, and I want to be sure that this is clear, our state associations and our RPICs also have a variety of these resources. So please make sure that you're reaching out to your state association and your Regional Performance and Innovation Consortium lead, because there are a lot of resources that we're trying to share with one another. And we want to be sure we're doing that effectively and efficiently. So so reach out to someone, and we'll try to make sure that you get whatever resources are available. Thank you so much for your time today, and we wish you the best of luck on your journey.